Now, here's Doc Watson.
Good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of Naturally Good for You, the show designed to give important information about nutritional supplements and alternative medicine so you can make more informed choices about your own good health. I'm your host, Deborah Doc Watson, and we have what I consider to be one of the most interesting shows that I've done in a long, long time. We have with us in the studio here Stephen Davis. He's a former Arizona State Senator, commercial pilot, captain of a whale and dolphin research ship, and he's a founding member of the musical director for Up With People. But that's not the reason why he's on the show today. He's written a book, and the book is called Wrongful Death, the AIDS Trial, and it's how bureaucratic lies and incompetence, gross medical malpractice, and unbridled greed by a drug company. It cost 300,000 people, Americans, their lives in just 10 years. And what I'm referring to here is, of course, the AIDS epidemic here in the United States. And what he believes, and we're going to be talking about it today, is that HIV does not cause AIDS. And there's another reason why people back in the 80s and 90s were dying from AIDS, and it has nothing to do with the virus HIV. Welcome to the show, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Doc. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Man, I'm telling you, your book, it's riveting. It's really a novel, but it's based all on fact. That's
right. Part of the book is 900, more than 900 actually, medical and scientific reports and studies and references and magazine articles and videotapes and books that people can use themselves to find out whether what I'm saying today and what I've said in the book is true or not. It's all documented. It's all referenced right there.
Well, I got to tell you, because of the way you presented it, it was very interesting. It kept my attention. So I want to talk about it. And first of all, I want to find out, why is it you decided to write this book?
Oh, that takes me back about 15 years, actually. As a result of my experience in government and my training as a physician's assistant, I never really bought into the HIV equals AIDS idea back in the 80s and 90s. I was also fairly upset about how the government was making people so afraid, especially afraid to have sex. And if you remember, back in the early 1990s, this was a big thing.
Deal.
Absolutely. You have sex, you're going to get HIV, and you're going to die. Unfortunately, that's still true today, and we'll talk a lot about what's going on today with people who are being diagnosed as HIV positive. But I started doing my own research just to satisfy myself. And one of the things I read was a book by Dr. Peter Duesberg called Inventing the AIDS Virus. It was published in 1996. And it's long and involved and technical. And what I did was take it and condense it into a fairly short and understandable article that was published on the Internet called AIDSgate. That was 1997. And I thought I was finished with the issue because I documented in there the fact that HIV does not cause AIDS. It cannot cause AIDS. It could never cause AIDS, for that matter. And that 90% of the AIDS cases from 1984 to 1997 were caused by the drug AZT, which was being given to people to cure them or treat them, and it was killing them instead. That HIV was not sexually transmitted. In fact, it's not even contagious. And I laid all this out in this article and suggested in that article that people who had lost loved ones to the drug AZT, supposedly dying from AIDS, get together and file a class action lawsuit against the FDA, the Department of Health and Human Services, and the drug company that made AZT. At that time, they were called Burroughs Wellcome. Today, they're called GlaxoSmithKline. And I hoped somebody would file class action lawsuit against these people and prove everything that we now know to be true. HIV doesn't cause AIDS, and AIDS was pretty much resulting from taking AZT. And that would bring this whole debacle, this whole tragedy into public view through this court case. Well, a number of cases were filed, but they weren't class action suits. They were filed privately. They were settled by the drug company for lots and lots of money, but also with the stipulation that
they wouldn't talk.
Exactly. And so none of this ever became public. And I don't have any what is called standing. To file a lawsuit, you have to be damaged yourself. I'm not gay. I've never had a homosexual experience. I don't have AIDS. I'm not HIV positive. I didn't have any family member who had died. So I personally couldn't do anything about it.
Yeah.
I was dependent on other people. Well, when no class action suit was filed, I decided a few years ago I would write a movie as if it had been. And I wrote a screenplay. Actually, it was a 2-part, 4-hour made-for-TV movie, which won an award, as a matter of fact, a screenwriting contest, but nobody would produce it. And so last year I finally said, all right, the only way to get this to the public is through this novel format, as if this lawsuit actually happened. And so I set this lawsuit in Phoenix, Arizona, starting October of this year, which is the 25th anniversary of AIDS. And the book is literally a courtroom drama.
Right.
It's as if this court case actually did happen, what would be said by whom. And although the court case itself is fictitious, every single word from every witness is documented and backed up by, as I said, over 900 medical studies that are listed in the book and on my website. As a matter of fact, while we're talking this afternoon, if people want to go to the website, it is...
what is that?
The AIDS Trial.com. The AIDS Trial, TheAIDSTrial.com. And they will find a lot of information there that you and I will be discussing this afternoon.
Yeah.
And they can follow along with us.
Well, let's just start out from the beginning. First of all, what is HIV? When did it come out? What's the deal there? I mean, I think everybody's seen And the Band Played On, which is the film that came out about HIV and AIDS, which kind of follows along with this theory that HIV causes AIDS.
Yes. That film, And the Band Played On, is about the announcement by Dr. Robert Gallo that he had discovered the cause of AIDS. He made that announcement at a press conference on April 23rd, 1984. The problem, and there are many, is that he now did not allow his peers to do any kind of background work, which is standard in medical research. What you always do is say, okay, I have found this to be true, and you announce that in a medical journal to your peers and allow them to do the same experiments to prove whether or not what you did was accurate. They have to be able to do the same thing. Well, Dr. Robert Gallo didn't do that. He just stood up at a press conference and said, I found the cause of AIDS. And he pointed to a picture at that press conference, and he said, it's this virus. Now, at that time, it wasn't called HIV. The naming of that virus happened a couple of years later, and it was a result of a political decision, not a medical one.
Correct.
We can talk about that, too. But so Robert Gallo stood up and said, okay, I discovered this virus, and this virus causes AIDS. Well, lots of problems with that. Number one, he has admitted, and everyone knows, he did not discover that virus that he pointed to. It was discovered by Dr. Luc Montagnier at the Pasteur Institute in Paris, France. Dr. Montagnier has later said that virus cannot cause AIDS, but Dr. Gallo said it did. That resulted in a big international blow-up that required President Ronald Reagan and then Prime Minister Jacques Chirac to sign this international agreement where France agreed not to sue the United States and Dr. Gallo in court and make this very embarrassing public display of Dr. Gallo's thievery in exchange for calling the two of them co-discoverers of this virus. But it was a mess at the time. And that's how HIV got known to be the cause of AIDS. Now, unfortunately, it fails every single medical and scientific test required for anything to be called the cause of a disease. And we can go over that because these medical tests are nothing more than common sense. And I think it's important for your listeners to know HIV fails every single one of them. Let's start, for example, with the simplest. And these come from a Dr. Robert Koch from actually the late 1800s, who said, in every case of a disease, you have to find the cause. Now, that's just pure common sense. In other words, in every case of smallpox, you have to find the smallpox virus. In every case of tuberculosis, you have to find the tuberculosis bacterium. If you don't find it, you can't call it that. Doesn't that make sense?
Of course.
Isn't that totally logical?
It is.
All right. Well, when we get back from the break, I want to tell you that not only have we not found HIV in every case of AIDS, we actually haven't found it in a single case.
We were talking about HIV right before we went to the break. And I just want to say something, because this is something you and I talked about right before we went on the air. You know, under any circumstances, when we talk about a virus, let's not talk about retroviruses right yet. Let's just talk about a virus. When a virus enters your body, you have the part of your immune system that goes to work. If the initial entrance into your system doesn't catch it, then this other segment of your immune system actually kicks in, and it develops antibodies to defeat whatever the invader. Okay, and that's what they do in the case of HIV. And what they're looking for when they're looking for somebody who's been exposed to HIV, they're not looking for a live virus. They're looking for the antibodies. Isn't that correct?
That's exactly right,
okay.
Doc. The HIV blood test does not test for the presence of HIV itself. It tests for the antibodies to HIV. Now, there's a lot more to talk about the test, but let's deal with the subject that you brought up.
Let's just talk about antibodies
because,
for a second.
Your listeners can understand this as well as I can, and Dr. Gallo and his crew must think we're absolute fools. But as you said, when a foreign invader invades our body that is dangerous to our body, the immune system goes to work to fight that. And there's a whole process it goes through. When it has successfully found the way to defeat that invader, it forms antibodies so that in the future, if that same invader comes along, it is all prepared to defeat it with the very same thing that defeated it the first time.
Absolutely.
That's the whole basis of vaccinations, smallpox vaccinations, whatever. We inject a small bit of smallpox into you. You fight it. When you found out how to successfully defeat it, you then form the smallpox antibodies. So if anybody's tested right now, they would have smallpox antibodies. All right, so here's the point. If we test people and find out that they are HIV positive, it only means that they have the antibodies to HIV, and that can only mean
they were exposed.
They may have been exposed, and they have successfully defeated the HIV.
Thank you. Yes, that's right.
So, honest to God, it is. So it should be a very good thing to be called HIV positive, because it means your body has successfully defeated the HIV virus, if in fact it even exists. But that's the only interpretation possible to a test result of HIV positive.
Right.
And yet, what is that test result now? Today, it's a death sentence.
Right.
You tell somebody they're HIV positive, you've given them, you've told them they're going to die of AIDS, according to Dr. Gallo and his friends, and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. They tell you you're going to die. You then go through intense emotional and psychological trauma, family stress, a social rejection, financial hardship from all the drugs that they're also going to tell you have to take so you don't get AIDS. It's a death sentence, and it is criminal what's happening today. I am outraged, and I hope everybody listening to me will become as outraged as I am, because maybe then we can do something about it. But to be honest, being told you're HIV positive is no more of a threat to you than being told that you have brown eyes or blonde hair. It means absolutely nothing.
Well, when somebody said to me that because you have the antibodies, you have HIV, that means you're going to develop AIDS, anybody in the first year, if they've taken a biology class, they know what that means. Yeah. They know what having antibodies in their body means, if they understand the way the immune system works. So to say that because you have the antibodies in your body, you are now destined to develop AIDS, there are people that have developed AIDS that don't have the HIV antibody.
There's lots of them, and there's 1 million people who have the HIV antibodies who have lived for 25 years.
Right.
Unfortunately, there were 300,000 of them from 1987 to 1997 who took AZT on the advice of their doctors and family and friends to treat this HIV. None of them survived.
Okay, let's just talk about AZT for a second.
Okay.
Okay, my understanding, because it's been years since I've read a lot of information about AIDS and so forth, and so when your book crossed our desk, I said, this would be an interesting discussion because a lot has taken place in the last, I would say, probably 7 or 8 years. And in the case of AZT, my understanding was AZT was a chemotherapy drug that was developed that was so toxic to our system that they actually put it on the shelf.
That's correct. It was developed in 1964 as an anti-cancer, as a cancer drug.
Cancer drug, okay.
It was found to be effective in killing cancer cells, but it was also found that it killed every other cell in your body. It destroyed your immune system. It destroyed your cells, your good cells.
Right.
And so, it was never even submitted to the FDA for approval because it wouldn't pass phase 1. Phase 1 in the FDA simply says it does more good than harm.
Yeah.
And that wasn't true of AZT.
At the time, back in the 60s.
In 64.
Yeah.
Well, when Dr. Gallo stood up and said HIV causes AIDS, all the drug companies went to find a drug that would kill HIV. And lo and behold, they found that AZT killed HIV. What they didn't tell anybody else was it killed all
everything
the rest of your
too.
good cells. That's exactly right. It destroyed the immune system. Now, what is AIDS? Let's review that. AIDS is an immune deficiency syndrome. In other words, AIDS occurs when someone's immune system is no longer functioning properly. That's exactly what AZT does. It destroys your immune system. AZT, the drug that was being given to people who were HIV positive to treat them, actually caused their AIDS, and within 3.5 years of taking AZT, everyone died. Everyone. Mm-hmm. And that accounted for 90% of the AIDS cases up through 1997 when we forced AZT. I'm not going to say out of the market because they still give very small doses of AZT in 2 of the cocktails that are being given today. And unfortunately, I don't have any studies that are recent enough to show whether that small dose of AZT is still killing people or not. I do know that people are still dying from AIDS, not nearly in the numbers that they told us would be happening by this time, and not nearly in the numbers that were happening in 1995, 10 years ago.
Well, you look at people, I can tell you, 2 of the people that stand out in my mind are Magic Johnson and Arthur Ashe.
Yep.
Those are the 2. Those are celebrity people. They ended up developing, Arthur Ashe developed AIDS. But Magic Johnson hasn't developed AIDS,
That's
and he's
right.
been living with the virus for how long? I mean, when was it, 10 years ago that he announced?
No, it was longer than that. It was 15 years ago.
Okay, 15 years ago when he announced that he was HIV positive, and he believed it was because of his raucous lifestyle, that he actually was exposed to the virus. And yet here's somebody that has not experienced, I don't believe, I mean, I see him every once in a while in public in photographs and things, and he doesn't look the worse for wear. He doesn't look sick to me.
Magic Johnson tried AZT for approximately 2 weeks. Then he got so sick, and it was very public, that he stopped.
Okay.
And he hasn't touched AZT since.
Okay.
He has survived, as you said, for 15 years or more as HIV positive.
Right.
Arthur Ashe, on the other hand, at the peak of his career, started taking AZT and took it for 3.5 years and died.
Jeez.
Now, unfortunately, no one has ever taken AZT in its full strength back in those days and survived more than 3.5 years. Arthur Ashe was in prime condition. He actually lived longer than almost anybody else. They were giving this a very highly lethal drug to people who were already sick with AIDS, because AIDS was a legitimate disease.
We're talking with you, Stephen, about the true reason why people ended up dying of AIDS, and we mentioned before we went to the break about Arthur Ashe. So in the case of somebody who develops AIDS, you said that that's a real disease. So what are we talking about here?
Well, it's a really good point, because over the years the media has tried to equate HIV with AIDS, and we need to separate them. HIV is supposedly the thing that causes AIDS. AIDS, of course, is short for acquired immune deficiency syndrome. Now, what I do in the book for better understanding and simplicity is to divide AIDS into 4 different categories. And let's start with what I call classic AIDS, and that's what started to be known in the early 1980s. Actually, this is the 25th anniversary of AIDS today, because it was 1981 when the first 5 cases were noted by the Centers for Disease Control. And what those cases were all about was an immune deficiency. In other words, people's immune system had stopped working, and they had developed what are called opportunistic diseases, and they had died. Now, that wasn't uncommon in medicine. This had been happening for a while, but we knew why and when it would happen. It was due to malnutrition, sleep deprivation, but most particularly it was due to drugs that were intentionally destroying the immune system. People like transplant patients whose immune system had to be destroyed so they didn't reject the organ, or in chemotherapy for cancer patients. That destroys the immune system as well. And so immune deficiency syndrome was well known in the profession. And in this particular case, here were patients who were immune deficient, but there was no known cause. That's why it was called acquired immune deficiency syndrome. Now, all of these patients in the beginning were in the gay community. Mm-hmm. And they didn't know what was happening. Well, the fact is that these cases of AIDS, it turns out, were being caused by a drug called amyl nitrite.
Okay.
Otherwise known as poppers, that's right. And it was known as poppers because originally it came in a little glass vial, and you broke the top off of it, and it popped when you did that. And this was used by heart patients in the 40s and 50s and 60s for angina and other heart pains. Mm-hmm. It was replaced by nitroglycerin, and so it was no longer used for that purpose. But the company that manufactured and had the patent on amyl nitrite, guess who that was? That was a company called Burroughs Wellcome, now known as GlaxoSmithKline.
Sure.
They had all this amyl nitrite hanging around. They needed to find out some way to move it and sell it, and they began selling it to the United States military and sending it to Vietnam as an antidote to gun fumes, believe it or not. Anyway, all this developed into the fact that the gay community discovered amyl nitrite was the perfect gay drug. Now, I'm not going to be very graphic about this, but I will simply say amyl nitrite allows gay men to have multiple sexual contact with other men in a single day. And when I say multiple, I'm talking about 40 to 50. There were gay men doing 40 to 50 hits of amyl nitrite, 40 to 50 sniffs of a popper every day in order to enhance their sexual activity. Mm-hmm. Amyl nitrite is proven to destroy the immune system of a human body. It also turns many classes of antibiotics into carcinogens. And you know that there was rampant use of antibiotics in the gay community as well.
That was one of the biggest things because of the fact they were coming down with, sexually transmitted diseases.
Exactly.
In fact, they used to use it as a prophylaxis. They would actually take it in advance. So, of course, that destroys your immune system, sets you up for overgrowth of yeast, a lot of other problems.
Exactly.
That, can really make you feel very sick.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So for the first 3 years, from 1981 when these first cases were discovered until 1984, everyone assumed and thought, and all the evidence was that amyl nitrite, or poppers, was causing AIDS in the homosexual community.
Okay.
Then Dr. Robert Gallo stood up on April 23, 1984, and said, oh, no.
Oh, no way.
It's a little thing called HIV that causes AIDS, and it's not even a virus, it's a retrovirus.
Well, wasn't it HTLV?
Yes, it was called HTLV3.
Yeah.
Yep. And the doctor who actually discovered it called it LAV. So it had several different names. That was resolved by a political committee in 1985 who said, we'll call it human immunodeficiency virus, or HIV.
Right.
That's how it got its name.
Years ago, AIDS was kind of not just a death sentence, but you were ostracized, you were vilified, you lost all your standing in the community. Most people couldn't hold their jobs. It wasn't just the fact that they were going to end up dying of AIDS. It's that they had a social death along with that. They were...
Still do.
Yeah. So, this is, and in light of what's going on in Africa, aren't they over there actually giving this medication to a lot of the Africans?
Yes. Oh boy, where do I start?
Well, let's not go across the pond here. Let's stay here in the United States and continue to talk about the different types of AIDS we're talking about here. The first one was the amyl nitrite. I knew that was one of the things that really compromised the immune system.
Yes.
Okay. In the case of men who developed AIDS as a result of this, men who had multiple partners and so forth, it wasn't just the fact that they were taking amyl nitrate, though. They ended up having all types of sexually transmitted diseases. They were taking the antibiotics, and they developed a lot of conditions that were related to AIDS, such as Kaposi sarcoma.
Well,
right.
Kaposi sarcoma is another whole story, Doc.
Okay.
Kaposi sarcoma is actually a reaction to amyl nitrite. It was thought to be a cancer to begin with, and by definition, Kaposi sarcoma is a cancer that is developed by Mediterranean men.
Right.
So, nothing to do with the gay man in the United States. But the blotches that were found on the chest, they are all associated with the inhalation of amyl nitrite. So Kaposi sarcoma became associated with AIDS because it was associated with KS. And later, actually, both Dr. Robert Gallo and the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, took Kaposi sarcoma off the list of AIDS diseases because it was proven that it had no association to HIV or AIDS, but strictly was associated with amyl nitrite. Now it's back on there, but that's one of the classes of AIDS we haven't talked about, one of the causes of AIDS, and that's AIDS by definition.
Okay.
The CDC has changed the definition of AIDS over the years numerous times. And it started off with a very simple, clear definition. First of all, you had to have an immune deficiency. In other words, your immune system had to be shot. Mm-hmm. Secondly, you had to be HIV positive. And thirdly, you had to have an opportunistic disease that you normally would not get unless your immune system was destroyed.
Give me an example.
PCP, pneumocystis pneumonia.
Okay.
For example. Now, these are diseases, we frankly carry around the causes of these diseases in our bodies, all of us, every day. And they only manifest when our immune system
is totally compromised.
Mm-hmm. And that's why they're called opportunistic diseases.
Okay.
They take that opportunity to come out. Yeah, sure. Mm-hmm. So that was the definition of AIDS. Well, the CDC has changed that definition until today. It now includes diseases like cervical cancer. Now, cervical cancer is not an immune deficient disease. Has nothing to do with HIV. But if you are a woman and you are diagnosed with cervical cancer and you are HIV positive, you are told you have AIDS and you're going to die from AIDS. If you're a woman with cervical cancer and you're HIV negative, you have cervical cancer. One of the reasons the CDC did this was because one of the laws to call something the cause of a disease like HIV is that it has to affect men and women equally. This is called the first epidemiological law of viral and microbial diseases. A virus, for example, cannot differentiate between men and women.
Okay.
90% of all AIDS cases were and have been and are men. That was a problem for Dr. Gallo and the CDC in terms of calling HIV the cause of AIDS. So they have added diseases to the list of AIDS diseases to specifically include more women to try to show that there is more equal distribution.
And the only real criteria for this is the fact that whatever they're diagnosed with, if in fact they're also they're positive for the HIV antibody,
correct,
then they are considered an AIDS patient.
Correct.
Oh,
Same thing is true as herpes simplex.
Oh, good Lord.
If you've got herpes simplex and you're HIV negative, you're told, here, we can take care of that.
Yeah, you got a cold sore.
Yeah. And,
okay.
Go on your way. You have a happy life.
Yeah.
If you have herpes simplex and you're HIV positive, you're told you're going to die. You're going to die. It's a death sentence. That is criminal. Speaking of criminal, I've mentioned this man's name many times on this program, Dr. Robert Gallo, the man who stood up and said HIV causes AIDS.
Yeah.
Let me take a minute to tell you about Dr. Robert Gallo.
Okay, well, you only have about a minute before we go to another break.
Dr. Robert, this is not the first virus that Dr. Robert Gallo stole. He also stole a virus from the Japanese.
Yeah.
He lied on his HIV blood test patent application.
Sure.
He's been investigated twice by congressional committees. Mm-hmm. He's been investigated by the Office of Scientific
He's a
Integrity.
megalomaniac.
He is a criminal. He's a thief and a liar. And one researcher has called him the American scientific gangster. And this is the man we believed for 25 years about AIDS and HIV.
He was just talking about Robert Gallo, Dr. Robert Gallo. He was the head of research at the NIH.
Actually, he was a very minor technician.
Okay.
Head of a cancer lab at the NIH, which is one small part of a very big organization. But this is a man who has always, in his entire life, wanted a Nobel Prize. And this is the way he thought he was going to get it. Now, contrary to Dr. Robert Gallo, we have 2,300 of the world's top medical and scientific researchers, including Nobel Prize winners in chemistry and medicine, and many members of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, who all agree HIV cannot cause AIDS. And if your listeners want to see a list of those 2,300 names, they can go to another website called RethinkingAIDS.com. RethinkingAIDS.com. That's the group for the scientific reappraisal of the HIV/AIDS hypothesis. And so I'm not out here in left field on my own saying these things.
Right.
This is mainstream thinking. Now, why haven't you heard about it before? Why has this been kept under the rug for 25 years? Well, unfortunately, the media have played a big part in that. Dr. Peter Duesberg, who in 1985, when Dr. Gallo had said HIV caused AIDS, and Peter stood up and said, it can't. It simply can't. It fails every single medical and scientific test to be the cause of AIDS. But Peter was denied access to any of the media, and there's a chapter in my book about all the interviews that were scheduled with Peter and how they all got canceled at the last minute.
Well, he was a well-respected, He was the world's leading virologist. A virologist, and he's still out there at the University of California at Berkeley.
Yes, he is.
So and I remember reading about him years ago where he had actually started out just doing seminars talking about the fact that this could not be the case.
Right.
You know, I don't think people, we were just discussing this off air. That's one of the nice things about having a show where you can go to a break and you can kind of chat, while we're off air. But one of the interesting things is that this kind of information, somebody was in the audience and asked, how come we're not hearing about this?
Right.
You know?
And it's true. What all you hear in the media today is HIV equals AIDS. HIV and AIDS are the same thing, and how rampant HIV is spreading throughout the world, especially in Africa. And you never hear the fact that there are over 2,300 of the world's top scientists who say HIV cannot have anything to do with AIDS because it fails every medical and scientific test to be the cause of AIDS. In the last hour, I talked briefly about the fact that one of the tests that you must pass if you want to be called the cause of anything is that you must find that germ or that virus in this case in every case of the disease. In other words, if HIV causes AIDS, we must find HIV in every case of AIDS. Well, even the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention have on record 4,621 cases of AIDS with no HIV. In other words, those people were HIV negative. Well, if we only found one case, we would have to go back to the drawing board, but they've got over 4,600 cases that have no HIV. And in those years, we were only testing a small percentage of AIDS patients for HIV. So there are probably more likely tens of thousands of AIDS cases with no HIV. It's ludicrous to say that you could have a disease and you could have HIV as the cause of it and not find HIV in those diseased patients. Now, there's another rule that has to be met if something's caused the cause of the disease, and that is you have to take the little bugger, the virus in this case, and you inject it in another healthy human body, not a healthy body. Now, we don't do that to humans because we don't intentionally make people sick. We do it to chimpanzees instead. Over the years, 150 chimpanzees have been injected with HIV. Not one of them has ever developed AIDS. Now, that right there is enough evidence to say HIV can't cause AIDS because it violates that rule.
Sure.
HIV violates every rule. Those are just two of them. But HIV is also not sexually transmitted. It's not even contagious. If HIV were contagious, we would see things called clusters. Think of it this way. As a matter of fact, I think there was just recently a mumps outbreak in some Midwest area of the country or something like that. When you have something that's contagious, all of a sudden a lot of people get infected with that in particular areas where it broke out, right? Okay. Those are called clusters. HIV does not cluster. It has never clustered. You cannot find clusters of HIV. The CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, say that over 1 million people in the United States are HIV positive, but they're spread out throughout the country with no cluster whatsoever. And, you know, if something is contagious, then it spreads widely and fast. Yeah. HIV started to be counted by the CDC in 1984, and at that time, they said there was 1 million people in this country who were HIV positive. Well, believe it or not, while the AIDS cases in this country went up from 0 to 50,000 a year in the next 10 years, by 1995, HIV positive people went down by 300,000. In other words, the CDC in 1995 said there were only 700,000 HIV positives. Instead of many, many people being infected, we lost 300,000 HIV positives.
Now, why would that be?
Well, because we gave them AZT and killed them.
Oh God.
That's the simple truth of it. Yeah. Those 300,000 HIV positives were given AZT, the drug that was supposed to treat them, which caused AIDS, and they died within 3.5 years. Yeah, well, the fact it was a chemotherapy drug would disturb me in the extreme. So by 1995, we only had 700,000 HIV positives. So rather than being this wildly contagious virus that's going to spread not only through the homosexual population, but through the heterosexual population, it didn't do either one. HIV is not contagious. It is not spread by sexual contact, and yet the government has made us so afraid that it has literally affected people's lives and their sex lives, for that matter. Sure. And this is just another instance of... Okay, now, you said that there was the amyl nitrate AIDS connection. Yep. Then there was the AIDS just by definition. Yes. I was saying that we have to break AIDS down into 4 different categories. The classic AIDS, which was the AIDS that started to manifest in the homosexual community in the early 1980s, and that was caused by the drug amyl nitrite, poppers. Right. That was being widely used by the gay community. The second kind of AIDS was AIDS by prescription, or what is known as iatrogenic AIDS. Iatrogenic means it's caused by a doctor or a hospital or a drug. 90% of the AIDS cases up through 1997, 90% were caused by the drug AZT, the drug that was supposed to cure and treat people. 90% of those cases. So there's a huge category of what caused AIDS right there. As I mentioned, AIDS by definition, where the CDC will continue to change the definition of AIDS until it includes things like cervical cancer, so that if you're HIV positive, you have cervical cancer, you actually are labeled as you have AIDS. That is another cause. Does that immediately put you in a category where they start recommending you take AZT? Not recommending. They make you do it. Oh, yes. Now, the cocktails that are being given today to HIV-positive people are not the straight AZT dosage that they did through 1995. It still contains 600 milligrams of AZT, which is about 1/3 of what they were giving earlier. And I must say that there are no studies to prove whether or not that 600 milligrams of AZT is still killing people or not. I cannot tell you that. One of the reasons I can't tell you is that it's combined with a lot of other things in this so-called cocktail.
The protease inhibitors.
Exactly.
Like that.
These antiretroviral drugs. So it may be that we force them to take enough AZT out of the treatment that we stop killing at least 50,000 people a year with it.
Sure.
But I still don't know.
Yeah.
All I know is this. That when someone is deemed to be HIV positive, when they're diagnosed through a blood test to be HIV positive, the first thing, and I'm not a doctor and I don't prescribe, but the first thing the evidence shows is if they get off these drug cocktails, they start getting healthy.
Well, I can tell you there's a number of natural remedies that I would recommend to anybody who has been shown as being HIV positive.
Doc, what happened in 1996 is that we began to expose AZT for what it really was. I was just part of a large movement at that time. And so we kind of forced GlaxoSmithKline is the name of the drug company today. We forced them to reduce the dosage of AZT that they were giving to HIV positives. And all of a sudden, they had all this AZT left over, not knowing what to do with it. You want to know where they sent it?
They sent it abroad.
Africa.
Yeah.
And what do we have over in Africa today?
We're having a pandemic of death.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you know what they're doing? They are giving the adult dose of 1,800 milligrams that was killing 300,000 of Americans. They're giving that to innocent women and children in Africa on a daily basis. And I know Africa's a long way away.
There's
but
actually
God,
one government over there that is resisting.
That and Thabo Mbeki is the president of South Africa.
Yeah, he is really resisting the whole idea that AIDS is caused by HIV and giving his people the drugs.
That's right. That's right. This is the fourth kind of AIDS, actually. It's AIDS in Africa. Because over there's an entirely different definition of AIDS. In Africa, AIDS is defined as you have to have one or more of four symptoms. You have to have chronic cough, high fever, diarrhea, and 10% weight loss. And if you have those, you have AIDS. You do not have to be HIV positive. You do not have to have a deficient immune system. You simply have to have one or more of those four things. Now, those four things
I would say the majority of people over there have it.
Exactly. So that is where, that's right. And so now they're being diagnosed as AIDS, and they're being given AZT, and guess what? They're dying right and left. Now, I know it's hard for us here in America, sitting in our plush luxury, to get upset or excited about Africans dying from AZT. And
I'm getting pretty upset.
Well, I hope so. I hope so. But you know what else is happening right here in this country today, and that is we are still diagnosing people as HIV positive here. And mothers and babies are still being forced to take AZT in this country, and we are giving HIV positives a death sentence when, in fact, HIV has nothing to do with AIDS.
Not relevant at all. Yeah.
The blood test that is being used to diagnose them as HIV positive is totally bogus. Do you want to deal with that one for a minute?
Yeah,
all right.
I want to hear about this.
First of all, this blood test was patented by Dr. Robert Gallo.
Of course.
An hour before he made the press conference announcement that HIV caused AIDS. He's made $1.7 million off of it in royalties. That blood test is so arbitrary and capricious that if you take a blood test for HIV in New York and you're diagnosed positive, and you go over to San Francisco, you fly to San Francisco that day, and you take another blood test over there, you could well be HIV negative. And if you keep flying over to Sydney, Australia, you definitely will be HIV negative. In other words, there is no standard, no criteria worldwide of how it's called markers, how many markers you have to have before you're determined to be HIV HIV positive. It is totally arbitrary. Secondly, the thing that the HIV blood test is reading, the things that the antigens that it's reacting with in the body, are not indicative of HIV. They are. They can react to many different things that are not HIV, and so.
So what you're saying is, even though it's showing positive, you might not have HIV at all. It's just reacting to the antigen.
Plus, there's so many false positives
that you'd have to go and get retested.
Absolutely. I mean, now the reason I wrote this book, Wrongful Death: The AIDS Trial, was because I wanted the truth of this whole thing to come out in court, that people could no longer ignore if it was sworn testimony.
Yeah.
Since that never happened in reality, I wrote it in a novel.
Sure.
This case, however, in my book could not happen today simply because the statute of limitations has run out to file a wrongful death suit against GlaxoSmithKline for these 300,000 on AZT.
What about people today?
Today, we still have something going on with diagnosing people as HIV positive, and I want you to keep watching the news in the next year because I intend to be very involved in filing a class action lawsuit against the manufacturers of the blood test, against the Department of Health and Human Services, against the Centers for Disease Control, for absolutely ruining the lives of a million Americans today by telling them they're HIV positive.
Well, my understanding was HIV was so weak it couldn't live anywhere. It just couldn't live anywhere.
Well, even the man who discovered it, Dr. Luc Montagnier in France, said it couldn't possibly cause damage in the human body because no retrovirus. You see, this thing is not really even a virus. It's a retrovirus. It's a very special.
Explain what a retrovirus is.
A retrovirus is something that they discovered that was going the wrong direction. In other words, the information was going from the RNA to the DNA, and they thought that was
the other way around.
Instead of DNA to RNA. It's called reverse transcription, and they thought this was very weird. Well, turning out it's not weird. It's very common. The latest research has shown that these things we've been calling retroviruses may not exist at all. A German court ruled in 2001 that HIV doesn't exist because nobody's ever been able to isolate it and take a picture of it, which is absolutely required. I'm sorry, I do get passionate and I get on and on about this because this thing is just loaded with, the Office of Scientific Integrity of the National Institutes of Health called Dr. Gallo's research of dubious scientific merit, unquote, and, quote, really crazy.
And now, who said this?
The Office of Scientific Integrity of the National Institutes of Health, when they investigated Dr.
Like the IG of the National Institutes of Health?
Yes.
And so they actually went in there and investigated his study, and they said this guy's got his head up his, he doesn't know it. He needs a glass belly button is what he needs.
Those were direct quotes.
Wow.
So, we could go on and on. We're going to be ending up talking for 2 hours today, and I could still go on about the things that are so ridiculous in this whole situation.
I want to let people know, if you want to read more about what we're talking about, you can go to Stephen's website, theAIDSTrial.com, and if you want to find out how many scientists are on the Rethinking the AIDS question?
Over 2,300.
2,300 of the world's best virologists and other scientific minds. You can go to rethinkingaids.com, and they'll talk about what we're talking about and give you some data on there that can put your mind at rest. We're talking about a pretty intense subject today with a pretty intense guy, Stephen Davis. He's the author of Wrongful Death, The AIDS Trial. You can go to his website, theaidstrial.com, or go to rethinkingaids.com. If you don't believe what we're talking about today, you need to find out more information. This is the kind of thing that you're not going to hear about on primetime TV because, let's face it, big pharmaceutical companies really control the kind of information that's put out in mainstream media. So you have to listen to shows like mine to really get the scoop on things that, this is dirty laundry. This is stuff that they want to sweep it under the carpet. They don't want anybody to know that in the decade following the discovery of AIDS, the fact that they said HIV was the cause of AIDS and giving people AZT and killing 300,000 Americans as a result of forcing them to take this medication that was actually a chemotherapy drug, which completely destroyed the person who was taking it.
Well, Doc, have your listeners think for just a second.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, this drug AZT was developed as an anti-cancer drug.
Right.
Now, what's cancer? Cancer is a disease where cells are multiplying uncontrollably.
Correct.
You need a drug that will kill cells.
Right.
AIDS is a disease where cells are dying uncontrollably. Why in the world would you give a drug that kills as many cells as possible to a patient with AIDS?
Whose cells are dying anyway.
Yeah. I mean,
well, that would just kill them quicker. That's all.
You know, the insanity of this whole thing is staggering. And yes, I'm intense. I mean, I want to admit it. I'm intense.
You know, I can tell you, I think one of the problems that we face in this country is the fact that we have got this mythology built around our medical community, and the fact that the FDA, in the case of natural remedies, I hear this day in and day out. Well, is this, FDA approved? Well, I don't happen to think that being FDA approved is a ringing endorsement, and this is a good example why.
Absolutely. Now, when the drug AZT was submitted to the FDA for approval, the entire panel was going to vote no until they called in some big guns, and the chairman of the panel was the only one ending up voting no about AZT. Now, there's a whole story about how AZT got FDA approval, and it was based on the fact that AZT was only approved to be given to the most serious full-blown AIDS cases at that time, until 2-year follow-up studies were done. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not what happened.
No.
Within 6 months, AZT was being given to HIV positives who were not sick at all. They had no symptoms.
Right, but I think that was because Madison Avenue stepped in. There was a lot of publicity about it. They were saying how great it was, and they had an ad campaign in a lot of magazines.
Show me the money. Show me the money.
That's exactly right. Jerry Maguire is right. Anyway. Yep. The fact of the matter was that at that time, if I remember correctly, they had major ad campaigns in all the big magazines showing men, and I'm sure this was directed at gay men, showing them if they did this, that they would be healthy, that they would be able to lead a normal life. And that is what they bought into.
That's right.
We were fed a pack of lies by a company looking to make money on a drug that was, at the very least, a half-baked drug for cancer.
Yep.
Because it wasn't, they didn't pass it for cancer because it was lethal.
Well,
as a drug.
That's
for that.
Right. It never passed phase 1 FDA.
So here was a way to get their money out of all of the research that they had done, all the money that they had paid for the research of a drug that went south, as it turned out. They could get their money back and then some.
Well, it's worse than that, Doc. They didn't pay a cent to research that drug.
Well,
that drug was developed by a guy in Michigan at a cancer institute up there and put on the back shelf up there. Burroughs Wellcome found it and claimed it, and there were a lot of lawsuits about who owned it, but Burroughs Wellcome came out with the ownership at the end.
Sure.
They didn't pay a cent for that drug, and they have made billions of dollars, and they're still today making billions of dollars by giving that same lethal drug to people in Africa.
Well, I know we talked about it off the air that there's one country in Africa that is not buying into the HIV/AIDS hypothesis.
Well, the president of that country, President Mbeki, is not.
Yeah.
I unfortunately
he doesn't have much. He doesn't hold much sway over the country.
Yeah, he's unfortunately under a lot of pressure, and the situation is so bad in Africa. I shared this story that came across the AP wire a couple of months ago of an uncle in Africa literally beating his nephew to death because the nephew was diagnosed as HIV positive. And so, you don't have to die of AIDS anymore. You die of the diagnosis.
Right.
And this is criminal in itself. And we're doing things that.
Well, what are some of the things that a person could do? Because I think that this has always been politicized. This is the only condition I know of that has been a political football from the very beginning.
Yeah. What can somebody do?
Yeah.
first of all, they need to educate themselves. And that's getting easier and easier. There are websites, my website, the AIDS Trial.com, a lot of references on there, Rethinking AIDS. There's a lot of websites you can go to and get some straight story. Now, one of the things you'll find in this whole debate is that you can go to these websites I've been mentioning, and we will provide you with a lot of scientific references. You go to the other side that says HIV causes AIDS, and they won't be able to provide you with any scientific references because there aren't any. All they do is attack us personally, which is what they did to Dr. Peter Duesberg and destroyed his career.
Right. Well, he was right out there in the forefront when the story first broke. He started doing seminars about this particular issue, and it couldn't possibly be the case.
That's right.
HIV couldn't possibly be the reason why people develop AIDS. And he had a lot of grants. He had a lot of research grants that were completely...
17 of them.
Wow.
All 17 of his grants were canceled. And he was denied. He's a member of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences. And every member has the right to publish in their journal called Proceedings. He was denied even the ability to publish his papers in the Proceedings. Now, there's only been one other person in history, one other member of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences ever denied the ability to publish in the Proceedings. Dr. Linus Pauling.
Oh, wow. Really?
So Peter Duesberg is in very good company. Right.
Well, I believe that. Yeah, Linus Pauling is
vitamin C.
Right, exactly. Taking high dose of vitamin C.
Yep.
Yeah, and Dr. Rath, Matthias Rath, he's German. He studied under Dr. Linus Pauling, and he has carried on his work.
So to try to more fully answer your question, what can somebody do? They need to educate themselves. If they want to read my book, it's a great way to start because it's an easy book to read, and because it's in novel format, it's a page turner. Let's put it that way. And then begin to tell other people, especially if you have people who are HIV positive or friends or people who have been diagnosed with AIDS, help them begin to understand that this has been a pack of lies.
Yeah. All right, we're back, and we've been talking with Stephen Davis. He's the author of Wrongful Death, the AIDS Trial. For those of you who'd like to read a chapter out of his book to see what it's like, believe me, it's a fascinating story. It takes place right here in Arizona, which I thought was kind of cool. You can go to his website, theaidstrial.com, and my recommendation for you would also to go to rethinkingaids.com. I think you'd find that an interesting website. And I'm sure there's other websites that would be good for them, and chances are there's other links that they can go to.
I have links on my own website to a couple dozen other websites that people can surf.
I think that I don't know of anybody, I mean, I have lots of friends, and I don't know of anybody that hasn't been touched by this.
Yeah.
By the fact that somebody close to them has died of AIDS.
Well, do you know, interestingly, Doc, I have not been touched by it personally.
Is that right?
Again, I'm not gay. I've never had homosexual experience. I don't know anybody I don't have friends who are gay. I know now one person who is HIV positive, and I've met just in the last week. I never had anybody die of AIDS. I am so completely objective in this. I didn't start with any emotional attachment.
Yeah, no
because
bias.
of that.
Sure.
So I was able to go do this research strictly on a scientific viewpoint. And but you're right. I'm unique in that most people have friends, family, loved ones, significant others that have been affected by this, and it still happened. And if it hasn't happened yet, with the way things are going, it can happen soon. Do you know that the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, have already announced publicly they want everyone to, whenever anybody gets a blood test at a hospital or a doctor's office, they now want the HIV to be tested automatically in that blood spectrum. In other words, they want to make universal HIV testing. Now, not only is this ridiculous because, as I explained earlier, the HIV blood test is virtually worthless, but it's also going to make this whole problem even much worse with people who are being diagnosed as HIV positive and the death sentence that they're being given. And the logic behind the CDC is that they believe there's 1.3 million people today who are HIV positive, and they think maybe 300,000 of them don't know it. Well, frankly, they're the lucky ones.
Sure.
But they want them all to know that they're going to die, and that's why they want HIV blood tests done automatically as part of any blood panel, like a SMAC-12.
I must say, Stephen, that I am so disturbed by this news because of what's happening in our country right now.
Yes.
With the Patriot Act, the way it reads at the present time, we have lost a lot of our civil liberties without even knowing it.
Mm-hmm.
And most people think that it's okay, and I'm not one of them. I really believe very strongly that we need to repeal the Patriot Act, and because of what it gives government.
Sure.
I mean, I was watching a program not that long ago, and it had to do with the fact that the federal agencies have what they call sneak and peek warrants, which means that they can actually enter your house surreptitiously. Mm-hmm. Take out anything they want, and they don't even have to notify you weeks or months later. Mm-hmm. They can actually wait to tell you. So all that time you think somebody's actually broken into your home.
Doc, this is why I got out of politics. I found that government was not the solution. It's the problem.
Really?
And I want to be part of the solution.
Yeah.
And in this particular case, in case of AIDS and HIV, I know, and I don't blame people for not getting excited or involved in something until it touches them personally. That's human nature, and it's wonderful to live in a country where we have all these freedoms to do stuff, but eventually all of us are going to be touched by something, one thing or another. And in case of AIDS and HIV, this is a very serious and very dangerous situation that we find ourselves in.
Well, it's the kind of thing, I didn't speak up when they came for... it could be for the Jew, and I didn't speak up when they came for the Christian. I didn't speak up when they came for the homosexual. I didn't speak up. And finally they came for me, and there wasn't anybody there to speak up. We need to speak up, and it's not unpatriotic. That is why we love the United States of America, is the fact that we have a voice, and we are able to speak what we believe. And we have the freedom to do so. And
you've given me the opportunity today to talk about the other side of the HIV/AIDS equation.
Right.
And I'm very grateful for that, and you should be congratulated for that, because it is not often that this viewpoint is allowed on the air.
Right. Well, I really believe everyone should have a voice, and then people can make their own determination. That's what makes knowledge is power. And when you have the right information, you can make good decisions. And if there's just one person out in our audience right now that is living with the diagnosis of being HIV positive, or that they're actually under the cloud of AIDS, they at least now have a fighting chance. Okay, we're kind of wrapping everything up right now. We've been talking with Stephen Davis, and he is the author of Wrongful Death, the AIDS Trial. You can go to his website, theAIDSTrial.com, and find out more information. This book, it was riveting. I found it fascinating. It's a novel, but it's based in fact. You can go to his website. There's also another website that you'll find interesting called RethinkingAIDS.com. And as we were leaving, you've got some last thoughts.
Well, Doc, 300,000 people in this country were killed by giving AZT, a drug that was supposed to treat them, to people who weren't even sick, HIV positives who had no symptoms whatsoever. Mm-hmm. This was done on the advice of medical doctors, of family, of friends. And, of course, now we know that advice was misguided. there are a lot of families and friends out there right now who are finding out that the suggestion and the support that they gave their loved one to take AZT
was based on a lie.
And I feel for them. Yeah. I really do. As a matter of fact, in my book, I try to make the point that I know they were trying to do the right thing, and they were doing the best they could at the time.
I was going to say, based on the information that they had, they thought they were making a good choice.
Right now, today, we are diagnosing people as HIV positive. If you are one of them, or you have a friend who's one of them, or you know somebody who's a friend of one of them, it behooves you, it almost requires you to educate yourself about the truth of HIV and AIDS, so that we don't make that same mistake again. I don't want anybody 5, 10, 15 years from now regretting the fact that they had somebody who came to them for advice, and they suggested they take any of these antiretroviral drugs.
Thank you so much for being on the show, Steve.
Doc, it's been my pleasure.
And I hope you come back and see us again when you write your other book.
Let's do that.
Okay, very good. We've been talking with Stephen Davis. He's the author of Wrongful Death, the AIDS Trial. You can go to his website, KXAM, and read about the book. You can actually read some of the chapters on there to see what it's like, and also go to rethinkingaids.com. And I want to remind everybody to realize that life's not a dress rehearsal. You only get a chance to go this way once, so make it count. Take the road less traveled. That can make all the difference. Thanks for listening. I'm your host, Deborah Doc Watson, saying bye for now, and let the journey begin.